mean, from the very beginning, the development of the first cell divided into two cells. The sole purpose of life has been to pass on what was learned. There is no higher purpose. So if you're asking me what to do with all this knowledge you're accumulating, I say, pass it on.
Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Hello, Bartek. I'm home.
Ryan, is you home?
Bartek, I'm home. I'm home.
Come in then, Ryan, to home.
Thank you. As any old-fashioned sitcom would say, they would walk in and say, "Honey, I'm home," and then everyone would applaud.
Come in, my fair Lucy.
My Fair Lucy. Talking about My Fair Lucy, we are in fact Spit and Polish Presents, likingly because we're always spitting. We're both Polish, and we're presenting to you a podcast in which we talk about something in particular. And on this podcast, we are doing Pictures Powwow, where we talk about a movie that has come recommended. On the recommendations, it goes into a certain rhythm, a certain beat, a certain cycle. Bartek launches us off, and then the week after, it is I to follow through, and then you, the listening people, catch the ball at the end to pass it back to Bartek. And talking about Bartek, it's actually, in fact, your turn now to tell us a bit about Polish culture and what's been going on.
You know, Ryan, you ask this question a lot, but you never contributed.
I actually do, and that's a lie. Don't you, in fact, say that? There have actually been instances where I've said things have been going on, and you don't know, and fuck you.
I don't know, Ryan. I can't think of any examples, and you know my memory is great.
His memory is pitch perfect. Please listen to any episode we've done on the show to prove this point. Please don't bring any examples that say otherwise.
I like when you mentioned the cycle, you were like, Bartek launches us off. It's like, ooh, sci-fi. And then at the end, it's like, listen, people pass the ball back. It's like, oh, now it's sport.
It's all...
Whoa! What the fuck? Ryan's got a thing on his door and it just fell.
You spooked me.
Well, your door should I put it up?
Nah, leave it alone.
No, I'll put it up.
All right, it's gonna fall. It's gonna
again. Like this.
Sure. If
Okay.
it falls again, it fell again.
Oh, but I was sitting down at the same time, so I didn't hear it.
You will leave it there.
Yeah,
It'll be fine.
It won't spook me again.
Hold on.
But
Let's just slow the brakes. For fuck's sake, I'm not keeping all that in.
oh
Boy, because you scared me. I don't want you to scare
Ryan doesn't
the
want him to be
listening
scared.
people. I don't want you to scare the listening people.
just start with a not trigger warning, but like disclaimer, like there will be a scare at this point.
There will be blood.
Spooky month may be over, but we've got the real scare in this episode, guys.
Nothing scarier than that.
Please keep it in.
Okay, guys, if you got scared, blame Bartek. So for further clarification, part of soundproofing in the room fell down, and Bartek got scared like a little bit.
Because
like
it's less than a meter from me. It's
little bit.
It's not in my periphery.
The foam is going to fall on you and hurt you?
Well, it wasn't a rational thing. It made a noise.
Exactly. It's not rational, and that's why I'm making fun.
I'm
making fun.
I thought someone was banging
I'm
on
having
the door.
fun.
I actually thought the door was opening and someone was coming in.
And it was your dad, and he said, "Honey, I'm home." Yes,
like, oh,
I brought it back. I brought it
My
back.
fair daddy, hello.
That's what he calls him. What's daddy in Polish?
So I would say tatuś. So it's like tato is like dad. Tatuś would be like a cutesy dad. So tatuś.
That's Polish culture brought to you by Bartek. And in fact, Bartek, you recommended the film of discussion. So please inform us all on what it is.
I launched us with a sci-fi film.
Don't fall soundproofing to scare Bartek again.
I've got my eye on you, which is bad because that means my mouth has to aim at the microphone.
You idiot. You have to choose your battles. So what did
Listen,
you...
people, the microphone's at my 12 o'clock and the thing that made the noise is at my 3 o'clock, so I have to turn 90 degrees to look at it.
So what did you give us to do as homework this week?
Well, funnily enough, Ryan, you were referencing I Love Lucy, and the film that I picked happens to have one of those words in it. And before you make the joke that it's I or love, it is Lucy from 2014.
9 years ago,
Yeah.
Lucy came out. And I saw it in the cinema.
Same.
I saw it after seeing Guardians of the Galaxy, which was a phenomenal film, a real surprise.
I saw that on the cinema too.
Guardians was an unexpected, film. No one was really thinking that these goofballs would be as cool and fun as they were. And now we're here to talk about Lucy.
Lucy didn't have the wood guy.
It did not, well, that French actor guy was pretty wooden, but we'll
Which
talk
one?
about, the main one she's teamed up with, like the detective.
Ah, right.
Sure. But no, Lucy 2014, starring Scarlett Johansson, directed and written by Luc Besson, who is well known, of course, for Leon the Professional, The Fifth Element, and a myriad of others. He would go on to do Valerian in the City of a Thousand Planets. And we are going to be talking about Lucy in depth and spoilers. So if you have not seen the film, recommend that you give it a watch. It is a movie with the pitch of what if a human being used 100% of their brain? What would happen? What could be achieved through this pseudoscience mumbo jumbo? Action set pieces, that's what will be achieved. As stated, we both saw this in the cinema all of those years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I remember not having too many, thoughts about it going in. I was just like, Scarlett Johansson, action movie with a mild sci-fi premise. Could be good, could be bad. I wanted to see another movie at the cinema that day. So, what's on? Oh, Lucy. It was just one of those, we'll just go with whatever. And I remember viscerally my journey of growing dissatisfaction, despondency, and disdain for Lucy as it went along, because the first 10 or so minutes, maybe 15 to be generous, I thought were pretty good, like interesting. I'm like, okay, you're actually building some tension here. The way that this character is being introduced as this ditzy, almost like a Far Cry type character, in which it's like the video game series Far Cry. Like, this is like Far Cry 3's exact premise. It's like party dickhead on a vacation in a foreign land, gets swooped up in an international drug ring conspiracy, and through the course of adventures and these drugs becomes a hardened, bitter killer. That's kind of what I liked about the opening. Scarlett Johansson gives a really emotional performance. And then she gets the drugs. And they make her into a character that you can no longer attach yourself to in any way, shape, or form. And so you're left with just the premise of, okay, what happens when she gets to 100%? And that's it. And I remember my absolute despair at that, because for the little glimpse of what this movie could have been, I was actually enjoying it. Like, I don't believe, I'm not an idiot. I know the whole 100% of your brain thing is all like garbage and it wouldn't actually do this type of stuff, but that's a sci-fi premise. And sometimes with a sci-fi story, you just have to buy the premise of things that aren't possible and aren't probable. And she just gets god powers, and I then had to sit there for what felt like hours watching mindless nothingness. It's not even as if the action wasn't bad, but it was always, and I never forget this, of your action can be good, your action can be great, but it means nothing if I don't have any stakes in the game. And that's what happened with Lucy. I'll never forget how palpable it was walking out of that cinema, seeing a protagonist go from relatable to just a void, a nothingness, and with no seemingly good reason or purpose to it. Because there is an artistry to making a character slowly become, inhuman and godlike and whatever, but Lucy just didn't find that special recipe.
Yeah, it is funny to think back on, like, this film is 90 minutes long, and for like 75 of those minutes, she's basically unstoppable.
Yeah.
And everything kind of goes her way, except for like one time. And even then, it was just for a few minutes.
And over the years, I've thought about Lucy in that realm of, here's an example of the importance of your protagonist. If you don't have your protagonists down pat. It's not even to say that you need to make them interesting. You need to at least make them constructed in a way in which there's a journey. And Lucy just is, I always remember it just completely blows it in this way. So that's my history and relationship with Lucy. What about you, and why did you recommend this?
So I saw this movie in cinemas with my mum, and back then, for a lot of films, I walked in pretty blind. Like, I don't even think I'd seen a trailer. I don't think I knew much about it. I think I had seen Leon the Professional at that point, so maybe I knew it was Luc Besson. Maybe not. But I remember, walking in, and it establishes its premise pretty well. You get all those scenes of Morgan Freeman explaining the theory and then his own hypothesis about it, and then you see that kind of whole thing play out and develop with Lucy. And I remember overall walking out satisfied. Like, it was, oh yeah, that was an interesting movie. Like, seeing the creative ways, the creative things that they came up with, of like, oh, what happens at these percentages and how does it increase? And it's basic point, walking away with general positive feelings. And then I remember, and we went into this a little bit last week, telling my friends about it. And one of them, Oliver, who, it's been a few years, but he's been on our podcast a few times.
He was too afraid to come on this time. He was asked and he said no because he's a coward.
Yeah, indirectly asked, don't slander him, but...
I will coward. Fucking, you should have come on. But go on.
And he had a very visceral reaction to it. Like, he hadn't seen it, but he'd heard about it. And he was just completely, slamming it, saying that the science that it was based off of is bullshit and it's ridiculous. And I thought to myself, like, well, it's just a movie. Like, obviously,
even the movie says this about the premise of, like, students ask Morgan Freeman, like, isn't this bullshit?
Yeah. It's a silly premise, but it had, action and visuals that went along with it. So it was a good enough experience. And I think most people would see that about the film. And then pretty much from that moment on, when Oliver had his reaction, most of the talk I'd ever heard about this movie was people kind of hating it for similar reasons. And that kind of made me think for these last 9 years, like, oh, was it not as good as I remembered it? So it's always been one of those ones that I had in the back of my mind of, like, I need to see that one again and kind of give it a, re-evaluation, because even now, my point still stands that, like, oh yeah, it wasn't meant to be science non-fiction. Even in the trivia, Luc Besson mentions, like, I was making this movie for like a decade, and at some point this theory became bullshit, but it was still an interesting enough premise to make a movie out of.
I've never had an issue with that part of it. Like, I don't give a shit about the real science or not. Like, this is the idea. Like, this is our little concept, and we're going to explore it. And it's mainly just a way of elevating our action set pieces as well as maybe existential themes. Okay, get it, done, good. There's so many great science fiction films out there that is like, well, that's bullshit. Like, time travel doesn't exist, by the way. Did you know that? Does that mean the Terminator films that are like Terminator 1 and 2, does that mean they're awful movies because time travel doesn't actually exist and you can't actually achieve it? No. It's fine. Like,
at the end of the day, there is a definition to the word fiction.
And I was actually looking forward to seeing this again, because I remember that first 10 to 15 minutes being exhilarating, with one caveat to it, which is the stock footage.
Oh yeah, it
kept cutting to of animals. I remember being dumbfounded by when I saw it in the cinema. Like, literally my jaw opened, because you don't need it. What you're doing in this moment is communicating. This is pandering. In fact, it's insulting to the audience. We know what these serve, and it's too much. Just live and breathe in your gritty little crime adventure that you've got here. Live in that. Just do that. And I remember that being like such a weird thing, because the movie drops it. It's only in that like opening act where it does the cutting to stock footage. We cut to other footage that's in relation to that stock footage, in a way of like the creation of man and, the first woman and so on and so forth, the original Lucy. But It was such a memorable choice to me, and one
Yeah.
that was poor. It was like, what a
So,
poor choice to make.
For listening people that haven't seen the film, the first 15 minutes is basically our main character Lucy, you know, fairly normal like college girl, gets into this situation where she has to hand a briefcase over for some clearly seedy deal, and then the mob that she handed the briefcase in basically like abducts her and forces her into this like drug deal, and you keep getting interspersed these stock footage of, was it like cheetahs
Mhm.
hunting antelope, and it's beating you over the head with like, she's the antelope and they're the cheetahs.
Yeah, leopards or cheetahs or
Yeah.
whatever. Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Yeah, it's too obvious. But the first 15 minutes or so is what I remembered liking.
Yeah,
Like
it was great thriller.
This bright, bubbly girl who's gotten in over her head, and now she's having to face off against this truly intimidating, if not cartoonish, but truly intimidating Asian crime gang. The actor who plays the head of this syndicate is the guy from Old Boy. I love that movie. I love that actor, and he still is the best part of the film just because of the actor's presence. I don't need him to speak English to be a good performer. Like,
that guy was a charismatic villain.
he didn't need like just his expressions, everything about him, just the way he carried himself is so like build the film around that. And so it's always left its mark when it came to that. And then obviously the joke is, spoilers again if you haven't seen Lucy, people go, oh yeah, and then Scarlett Johansson becomes a USB. Like, yeah, she becomes like a USB stick at the end for Morgan Freeman to have.
Yeah.
And it's like, how funny. But I was actually very keen to revisit this, especially because of that opening act. I was like, man, I want to see that opening act again, because I did get visceral fun out of her grabbing the belt and whipping it around the table and dragging the gun over and cocking it and doing the badass, like I'm a lady with a gun shit. And so I was very, very keen on that. And then the rest of it, I will be honest, I was dreading, because I was just like, all I remember is Scarlett Johansson with a blank expression, just doing anything, and it was very dull. And I have a big problem with Scarlett Johansson as an actress because of that particular thing, which is she's a very skilled performer. She's a talented performer, great voice. She has a great voice, does great voice work. But there's so many movies that I've seen waste her because she just does this like a monotone, blank-faced expression thing. And it's just a waste of a talent. And I just go, oh, she doesn't need to act. She just needs to be pretty.
It's funny to think of myself pre-rewatching this movie last night, because I objectively remembered the fact that the character she is at the beginning and the character she is after, you know, the turn is different. But I was still really thrown off by like how jarring it was to jump from one to the other.
How quick it is too.
Yeah, how quick it is too. But that first 15, 20 minutes did pace itself well, but yeah, like the immediate jump, and then for, like I said, the last 70 minutes, you do have the very stoic character who just speaks facts kind of thing.
So, what were your feelings overall towards this, and/or things that you were, I mean, I just talked about, but what were some elements of this that you were actually looking forward to revisiting, and how did you feel about the movie?
So yeah, I would say that I was looking forward to seeing how it all plays out again, you know, remembering the structure of it, remembering that there was that whole constant going back to like, oh, this is this percentage now, and seeing how it escalates. To seeing like the weird little things that happen there. I was a big fan of the 70% one, I'll say that now. And also, like I said, with my reason for choosing it, like seeing if I actually think the film is still good, if I still like it. And I do still like it, but I definitely see that, yeah, there's no doubt things to criticize about this one. And you've kind of gone into some of them too, with the jarring switch. And also, even comparing it to like those first 15 minutes, that last 5/6 of the film, it feels like a different person kind of made this film.
So, I hated this when I watched it last night because, and this is applicable to things that have been on the podcast before, perhaps, which is since I had seen the film before, I knew how it was going to play out. there was no surprise element. There was no giving the film the benefit of the doubt because I haven't seen it before.
Yeah.
I knew what was ahead of me, and it did not challenge any of the things that I needed challenging. And so I was bored beyond words. And that's hard because I'm going to podcast about it.
Right.
I was truly numb to this. And so I hate it. It goes around to being hate. I just wish I could at least loathe it for like funny reasons. Like, oh, that was a weird. But no, a lot of the reasons are just simple mistakes made of storytelling. I don't like any of the characters, not a single one, and that's a bare minimum you need in your movie. Even Lucy herself, yeah, maybe I liked the premise of her character in the first 5 to 10 minutes, but that doesn't mean I like her character. When they tried to do that scene where she phones her mum, and she's tearfully, talking about things as they cut her open, I couldn't help but think about like Garth Marenghi's Dark Place in terms of like how much they're trying to milk the sincerity of this to manipulate me, the audience, into thinking that this means something. And it was just so hollow and empty.
I'm sorry to hear that for you, Ryan, because I had similar feelings, but I did find a lot of it funny, how it was, kind of failing or not really working. Like that scene there, like the mum even wasn't really emoting as much. Like it really... Like, obviously, the scene was, the mum was dubbed in, but, like, the fact that I'm thinking, like, oh, this is a dubbed-in line really highlights how, this wasn't a natural fluid back and forth.
And again, there is some minor humor to be had, but I cannot get beyond the choice, the illogical choice, the truly, not illogical, but poor choice of, within 10 minutes, our main character is an automaton, emotionless, consequence-free. Not only because she has superpowers, but she no longer has morals. It's like, there's that operation scene where she walks in, like, in that operating room, and she just shoots the person on the thing and flips them over, and then has, like, this deadpan line of, like, you couldn't have saved them anyway, so just do this. And it's like, okay. Like, what am I supposed to get from you?
Like, even before that, like, when she got a ride with the taxi guy, she just shot the guy he was talking to. And, like, with the operating one, she at least had the excuse of, like, you weren't going to save him, so I just, fast forwarded so that you can help me. But with that other guy...
But did you like that was the first time we got subtitles so we could hear the dub line of him saying, ow, my leg, my leg. And that was before her brain had caught up to the ability to understand languages other than her own. That was literally the first time we had subtitles for any of the Asian people speaking, was so that we, the audience, could be content that he was alive. So that way, you can't be angry at Lucy because she didn't kill him. So she's morally still in the right. That was a cynical, like, that's what I mean. Like, my brain couldn't help but keep noticing these things because... what am I supposed to attach myself to? Because the premise it opens up with is very compelling of, here you have, your ditzy blonde American
who you're
in over
getting
her
to
head,
like. Yeah.
Getting to like in over her head in a nightmare. Like, there's always that nightmare of if you go away and you get embroiled in something that you cannot escape from because you don't have connections to help you.
Yeah, it's fear of the unknown taken to like an immediate degree.
And... yeah, I just, because I've seen this before, I couldn't get the giggles about some things because I was just so bored. I was like, oh, Lucy's just Scarlett Johansson with a blank face, pointing a gun, and I actually couldn't fathom why she was doing literally any of the things she was doing other than we need this to go to 90 minutes, which the film struggles to get to. Struggles to get to.
When I said before that this felt like, after the switch, it felt like a different person was writing it, I just could not let go of, in my head, the thought that this is like I feel hesitant to say this because Luc Besson is a prolific filmmaker, but like a high school, like, narrative that's been written, like, oh, this is my cool character. That thought just never left my head after a certain point.
I thought a film school student, and with the cuts to the stock footage of animals, I was like, oh, that's so... you would see that in second year university of like, look, I'm edgy.
I guess,
don't you get the symbolism?
Yeah, oh, look how badass she is. And like I threw in a little, comedic response from the cop that she's with, things like that. Like I think the fact that I kept thinking of that kind of kept me going with, being able to laugh at the film.
We did Perfect Blue on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And a discussion about Perfect Blue is that Darren Aronofsky had to, what was it? He had to like license or like
He had to buy the rights, I think.
buy the rights because he mimicked a scene, specifically the bathtub scene.
Yeah.
But Perfect Blue and Black Swan have a lot of things in common.
Wasn't it Requiem for a Dream?
No, it's, or is it Requiem for a Dream?
Yeah.
But Perfect Blue and Black Swan do have things in common narratively. Like people say they're basically the same film. Even if you say they are the same film, the difference is, there is major differences of artistic approach to both films. I could not help but watch Lucy and feel like what you're talking about of that high school student or young person who's like, oh, I like this thing and this thing and this thing, so I'll just do them. And I don't know if you agree with this, but it's ironic, actually. Oh my god, it's ironic because of who the lead actress is. I kept thinking of Ghost in the Shell when watching this, of having a badass lead female character who's very dry and emotionless do her job very efficiently. But again, Ghost in the film is more complex. Ghost in the film's lead character is actually has emotions and actually has an arc and a drive and a purpose. But I couldn't help but think of like, how would Satoshi Kon, for instance, handle the Lucy, like if he did Lucy as an animated movie? How I kept thinking about like, this film is aping from so many different pieces. And I just kept thinking, what if those original pieces I'm thinking of did this movie? And that's all that's another element of like, I was so detached from what was going on. I did that thing that I personally love doing with flawed movies of thinking about like how you could fix them, or if this was in another person's hands, how could it have turned out better?
Yeah, definitely I was thinking of Ghost in the Shell, and yeah, not even the Scarlett Johansson version that came out a few years later, but we did it like less than a dozen episodes ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, that one dealt with
personhood and autonomy
and like machines and connecting yourselves to them. Yeah, it's very interesting. And like I've mentioned before, just off podcast, like recently I've been watching a lot of like skits made by that YouTube channel Man Carrying Thing.
Yeah.
And he has the occasional one where it's about like that story you wrote in high school, and they're all like, edgy and like what you were saying, like things that you like at the time, pretentious in some ways, and yeah, just making yourself seem more mature than you really are at that age. And it even though it is Luc Besson and we like other films that he's made before this, it just felt like a regression in a way.
Why is this film so dedicated to fast forwarding through things? Because we get the countdown of the percentages. Okay. Now, Luc Besson, I know you're not listening, but this is what I mean by fast forwarding. She hits like 20% and her personality is just gone and she's got like superpowers. You fucking need to slow down, because the point of a narrative like this is very tricky because of what I said. We need to have some emotional attachment because Lucy is literally the only character we know. The Asian gangster guy, he's mysterious. He speaks Korean. We only know the bare bones about him. The French detective guy that she teams up with, we don't know much about him because we meet him halfway through the movie. Morgan Freeman's character is there just as the guy who justifies scientifically why the premise is working, but it's not like he's a character. Lucy's the only person we can know. And if you start to make her literally like not a human anymore, like not something we find tangible, that's a risk. But you can do that because it's science fiction. But it's about the balancing act. It's about the gradients. It's about slowly getting us to that point. But it's like you press skip, and here it is. I think of this. We did we both watched Babylon 5. There's an episode very early on in Babylon 5 called Mind War, in which a character called Jason Ironheart visits the station, and he has been accelerated in evolution to the point in which he becomes an energy being at the end of the episode. It's only 45 minutes, but that episode expertly made sure that he was still a human throughout the adventure, and over the course of it slowly became less and less recognizable, not only physically but mentally as well, so that when he did eventually transcend, we could feel something towards it. Lucy,
To give another analogy that I think more people will be familiar with, you know the galaxy brain meme, how you have like the
Mhm.
multiple levels? Kind of like skips a lot of the middle ones.
Yeah, I just, again, I have to keep hammering in on, like, it's a failure of your protagonist.
It is interesting though, because I'm thinking back to the point where it did switch, and like, let's say, the beginning of the film, she and everyone else is at 10%. The first time we see her elevated is in that scene where she's like tied up to the chair, and
Mhm.
she like seduces the guy with like, her body movements and like her wit, and that's the key word there. Like, she was clearly being more witty there.
She had a smile.
Yeah, she had a smile. She was using her brain. She was manipulating this guy to get him into a vulnerable position, and then she did like badass action things. And like in that moment there, already we see a switch there, and it's like, okay, this is interesting. But then after that, you get like the walking out, and that's where you get the shoot the guy in the taxi.
No, even before that, she gets shot.
Oh right, she's at the restaurant.
She sits down, eats food because she's super hungry, because also she's bleeding out. She's super hungry. And she pulls a bullet out of herself, and she just examines it with this like blank face, and it's like, how are we supposed to, even then, how are we supposed to feel about this, who's supposed to be like an average woman getting shot, and she has no feelings towards it? And here's something too. Where in the movie does it say when you get higher percentage of your brain, you no longer feel feelings? If anything, you could argue that if you're using more of your brain, you would be more like aware of emotional stability, and like, yeah, you could say like you get colder, but also like maybe your emotions get higher. Like, she's pulling a bullet out of her and she's a robot about it. Like, what? She's supposed to only be like a percentage or two higher than what we are at that point? Like, how am I supposed to fucking care?
We do get a scene not long after. It's when she's on the operating table and she talks to her mum, where she has a monologue about how she basically remembers anything and everything she's ever experienced, even if it was something that didn't stand out.
The bones cracking under her skin and everything.
Yeah. I did like that line where she was like, I remember all 1,000 kisses you gave me. That was a good line.
She cries in that monologue, but not when she rips a bullet out of her skin.
Yeah.
Or when doctors are operating on her belly.
Yeah, so I guess the explanation that we're meant to get from that monologue later on is that I guess at some point she put together all the knowledge she's ever peripherally came across, and I don't know, had some sort of realization that like she'd be fine based on how loose like, obviously I'm making excuses here.
What you're saying is what you explore in a feature-length film rather than unsaid in between a scene. Because literally her shooting that guy, like her getting the gun and her walking out, that revelation you're explaining happens between those cuts. In a science fiction film, that's the entire film.
Yeah.
We need to see her grappling with the fact that she's realizing she can remember things that no human being should ever be. She should have concerns about it. She should wrestle with it. She should actually, again, Perfect Blue, a great example of a film that does similar things in terms of we see a main character wrestling with their psyche and having memories of things and having to grapple with, and same with, even though this is a comedic film, but Tokyo Godfathers does the same thing, where it's like our characters struggle with the fact that the more that they uncover of their past that they've buried, it challenges them on a philosophical, existential, and ideological level.
Yeah. I guess, this character has done all that, but we want to see it.
Yeah, it's...
or is beyond it.
And this is another one, and I'll pass stuff over to you because I know I'm kind of going off, but in terms of fast-forwarding, and I never forgave the film for this, she takes care of the Asian crime lord within like 5 minutes. And then they're gone for most of the movie, and then they come back randomly at the end, but it means nothing. Like, no, build the whole movie the whole movie that she's using her superpowers to take down the syndicate. But no, in fact, it's like she just gets in there easily, stabs him in the hands for no reason, like just kill him, and then leaves only so he can come back at the end to do nothing.
That's the clarification you made. When she takes care of him, she doesn't kill him. She stabs him and says like intimidating things to him, which he probably wouldn't understand anyway since he doesn't speak English.
Yeah, it wasn't like he was lying. He genuinely doesn't speak English.
Yeah, Lucy, you're the one who can understand him now.
But maybe when she put her thumbs on his head and glowing stuff went into his brain, maybe he understood now.
She gave him a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy babblefish ability.
I was going to say she just mind melded with him, like Star Trek, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe she did that.
You know who produced Star Trek?
Luc Besson?
Lucille Ball of I Love Lucy.
Oh, My Fair Lucy.
Yep. Just to bring it back to the beginning. But yeah, like, I would watch a movie about a girl who got drugs put in her, made her have psychic powers, and then she uses it to slowly build herself up and do like a takedown revenge of an entire... That's video games. Like, isn't that like the Max Payne video? Like, isn't that like the type of thing?
That's stories. That's a revenge film.
Yeah. This film says, I don't want to do that.
This is like a rape revenge film without the rape, yeah.
Yeah. This film says, I don't want to do that. So what does it want to do? I actually can't tell you what it wants to do, like, in between those things.
Yeah,
it's kind of meanders about.
Well, before, when you mentioned fast-forwarding, the immediate thing that came to my mind was that, you know, throughout the film, we do get, like, increases of 10% throughout it, and there's, like, an elevation of the power. So even at that, like, base level... You know, there is an interest there of like, oh, so what's she going to be able to do next? But then the last 40 to 50% is all within like the last 10 minutes of the film. So even then, it fast forwarded its pacing that it established. And so, yeah, you did get like, oh, this is what she has at 60, 70, 80, 90, and then she hits 100. But that's all within like 5-10 minutes. And it really does feel like they wanted to get the film over with. So even you made the joke before about how like, oh, it was really struggling to fill it, but it almost felt like, well, did it have to? Because you could have just spaced those bits out a bit more and did more with them.
Yeah, but what's it spacing it out with?
Yeah, I guess that's the point.
That's what I mean. Like, it's struggling to get to 90 minutes because outside of just saying what the premise is, it has nothing to follow through on with material. It's
ironic.
Not interested in the philosophy or the existential dread that could come from such a thing being true. It's not really wanting to go through the sci-fi mumbo-jumbo of it because it does that in one scene and then just says, you get it. It doesn't want to be the revenge story. It doesn't want to be like the crime action. Like, at most, it wants to be an action movie. And it does that, but again, we don't have any stakes. I'll bring this up. Everyone knows this. It's iconic. John Wick is a film franchise in which you root for John Wick to keep murdering people because they stole his car and killed his dog. It's comedic how much that film franchise leans on how simple it is that you root for him because people fucked him over in the most, like, you know, obvious way, but it's like it's played sincerely, so you actually feel like, yeah, John, you go after them and destroy this entire crime family because they killed your dog and stole your car. Lucy doesn't have, like, it's not even interested in the they killed your dog and stole your car. Nah. Just stab him in the hands and walk off. Just, you know what I always find hokey, and I've said this with some sci-fi, I miss science fiction where you can look at things via screens and buttons. I'm really sick of you just have a CGI thing in front of you and your character just does, or your actor, I should say, just waves their hands about.
Like touchscreen, but in the air.
Yeah, and I know Lucy's doing this telepathically, I guess, but it's so corny to me. It just looks so cool. Like, when you go on IMDb, one of the pictures you see first straight off of pictures is Scarlett Johansson with a doe-eyed expression wiggling her fingers at some CGI nonsense in the air, and I'm just like...
Yeah, Matrix text in a car or something.
Yeah, I just... Like, I wish there was more I could really talk about, because obviously people want to hear us riff on the whole, like, it goes really out there and extreme because she becomes, like, Super Saiyan level and she lifts people in the air, and she maybe, you know, for all of her power set, she doesn't really use a lot of powers when you think about it until key points, and it becomes crazy. Where does she time travel and she connects and she gathers up the entire history of the universe and puts it on a USB stick? Yeah, that's all wacky and crazy, but it's actually, for my money, meaningless and boring and dull when you actually get there, because like when 2001 A Space Odyssey does all of that crazy stuff, it's like had atmosphere the entire time. Lucy doesn't have atmosphere. So it's just, oh, that happens. And then the movie ends.
My biggest laugh was when the movie ended, because it ended on what the film treated as a really poignant line. It was something like, "We were given life 1 billion years ago. Now you know what to do with it."
Mm-hmm.
And I laughed really hard at that, because like, what do we know to do?
Yeah, now we just have scientific data, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. And also it ends with like pop music plays. I'm like, okay.
It wants us to become super powerful.
I just want to say, in Babylon 5, when Jason Ironheart was transforming, he says, "I am becoming." And you just said, like, become. It just makes me think, but what were some elements of the movie that either worked for you or didn't, or things that you want to pick apart?
I did find it funny. I mentioned before I really like the 70% mark, because that's where she got Venom's symbiote.
We've seen Venom.
We've seen Venom now.
And this came out before.
Yeah, it did. And it had a similar effect of, like, I mentioned in the Venom episode when you asked me, like, was there something you liked? I mentioned that I did like it when the little symbiote was, like, separate and it was, like, all, you know, whizzing out and moving
stuff,
tendrils. Yeah. And we got a bit of that when she hit the 70% mark. And then you get that nice dubbed-in line from Morgan Freeman, like, "It's connecting to the machines."
This film is one that is constructed post-production a lot. Like, there's a lot of, clearly in post, they saw this wasn't working and they needed to explain things or plug in lines.
I also mentioned last week, like, I'm kind of hesitant to say that this is not a Hollywood film because, you know, it's apparently a French film, but I see it more now. Like, all the minor characters are French.
Oh yeah, that's what I remembered was, and it's weird because the Asian crime gang is Korean, but they're not in Korea.
Yeah, they're in Taiwan, apparently.
Interesting choice. Don't know why, but okay.
Apparently
sure.
Taiwan is really pumped about the fact that, you know, Taiwan featured in this film for a fair portion. So
I mean,
that's cool.
Good for them. It makes you look shitty, but good for you. It looks like a fucking awful place full of crime and no one cares, and you get stabbed in the back at any turn. There is, and
the taxi driver seemed nice. The surgeon seemed nice.
At gunpoint.
They weren't swearing at her when she intruded.
I was surprised that the surgeon spoke such fluent English, by the way. Like, he was so fluent, and maybe there's sure, I guess that happened. It was just so funny because she encountered nothing but people who couldn't.
Well, she shot someone because they couldn't.
Oh, was that? And that was a bit before her brain fully learned languages that weren't her own. She had learned, like, visual, like, written stuff. Like, we saw the special effect, which I laughed at, of the sign in the hospital saying, like, radiology just transform into English. It was very amusing. So any other stuff you wanna mention?
The cop was perfect, wasn't he?
What a nothing character. Why did they even the reason you bother is because you can't follow Lucy as she becomes a nothing. So you need someone who's a human being near her, but
when they kissed, that was the most "what are you doing" thing for me in the film, I think.
That was laugh out loud. Like, why are you even trying at this point?
It's like they think like, wait, stop, and then they like got closer together. I'm like, in another film they would kiss, but that wouldn't make sense for this film. And then they kissed. I'm like, oh, shows me.
I know this doesn't really matter, but if this was an anime, like if this was animated and it was presented the same way, would we think this is more poignant than it is? Because when I see it in live action, I do think it's inherently goofy, but I kept thinking of, like, if this had the aesthetics of Paprika, would I think this is more profound than it is?
If Satoshi Kon did it.
I kept thinking about Satoshi Kon doing this. I'm like, man, he would have really sunk his teeth into this. Like, he would have really gone for it.
I was thinking Paprika a fair bit, yeah.
I don't know. I kept thinking about, like, if this was an anime, would I take it more seriously? Because there's a certain, like, mindset when you go into that. But when you see a live action movie with Scarlett Johansson cocking a gun, there's certain, like, okay, this is like a action movie, and on an action movie level, it's not really that compelling, and on a sci-fi level, it's also not.
Well, with Paprika, we both are kind of in agreement. It's like, oh, it's not his best of the four that he did, but the visuals of it really are what at least I remember from it, like all the dream sequences, the color, the fluidity of the animation. So yes, if seeing this film in like an animated form and like all those weird, trippy, like time-lapse things being done fluidly would be something to marvel at. Like, wow, someone, created all of this. Not to say that this film they didn't create it,
Yeah,
but
there was
like, yeah,
CG.
seeing it in animation,
Yeah, there's something
traditional
about
animation.
CG. Sometimes it takes away, sometimes it works. When she's like changing her hair color in CG in live action, I just thought, why do that? But if it was an animated project and that happened, I'm like, yeah, of course. I don't know. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Can I recommend people to check out a film called Under the Skin, which Scarlett Johansson did roughly around the same time as this, in which she plays an alien that has come to visit Earth, and she seduces men to take them back into her weird alien lair to drain them of their like bodily fluids and nutrients and stuff. Very similar in ways to this, but also very different. And I just wanted to flag that up as like something to check out, as like a good example of having your lead character be this inhuman, emotionally devoid person, but also has Scarlett Johansson, but it's really good, and you actually feel things. I don't know. It's worth checking out. I kept thinking about that too. I'm like, oh yeah, Under the Skin is like something that scratches the itch of this a little bit more.
And if you're into that, the first half of that premise sounded very similar to Alien Intruder.
It did. But let's at least talk about the ending when she becomes a USB. It's funny, right? Like, I found it very funny. I don't take it seriously. I'm like, I don't think I can take it the way Luc Besson wants me to. It's this like profound thing. I was like, it has the stars of Orion on it, so you know it means. I just couldn't help but laugh at Morgan Freeman being handed a USB, being like, oh, this is so important. I'm like, yeah, Morgan, we know you love money.
I saw it as her producing one, but yeah, it seems like everyone interprets it as her becoming it. That makes it much sillier.
Yeah. I mean, when you saw it in the cinema and now,
Venom
what
should have
does
ended
that
with
Venom USB, her becoming
To be honest,
weirdness?
To be honest, I did not remember the exact ending. I remember her vanishing and like she's everywhere now, but I didn't remember the USB thing.
I like that she was in a chair everywhere. Like she's sitting in a chair, and it's just here she is in Times Square, here she is in the past. And she's still sitting. The chair goes with her.
Yeah, I liked our antagonist's confusion when she vanished from the chair, and he just like spun it and was like yelling at the scientists.
How did he get in there?
Through the door.
Yeah, but I also liked his evil henchman guy that they, for some reason, tried to set up as important. Like when there was like 10 minutes left of the movie, like he had this other brooding evil henchman guy.
The one from the hospital.
Yeah. Like I know I'm not exaggerating, but he really feels like late in the game introduction. I don't even remember him in the hotel. He had all these other guys that we saw get killed, but I don't remember this guy.
A lot of his other henchmen got like equal focus, so if he was there, like I really couldn't tell you.
I remember like the big guy, the kind of bigger guy who we see. He's like the one that's still like dying as she walks in after shooting through the door. We had like his main right-hand man guy who was like a guy with a little bit of facial hair and thinning up top a bit. And then obviously boss henchman, and of course the translator on the phone. I loved that. See, I love that type of stuff where you have this brooding menace, but there's a bit of humor to it because the gangster guy is still covered in blood. He's trying to light his cigarette. He's very disappointed.
Yeah, the humor worked a lot more in that beginning bit than the rest of the film, where it kind of felt like, well, the character's kind of beyond how she was in that first part, so it feels like the film kind of should be.
I liked a review I read where someone rated this film negatively by saying, if you just want to see Scarlett Johansson's tits, watch another movie. And I'm like, I don't even think that's the appeal of this movie. But then I watched it. I'm like, I guess it is, isn't it? Because it is about her sex appeal. It's like Luc Besson's like, look at her in a little white t-shirt with a black bra underneath, and the shirt gets more ripped and torn as it goes along, and she's jiggling and bouncing everywhere. And I'm like, it really is that.
Weren't some people saying that this film was like semi in jest, like, oh, if Marvel's not going to make the Black Widow movie, then this is it?
Yeah, basically. And they did make the Black Widow movie, and it was also bad. So.
And too late. Better to be early than late.
I have nothing else to say about Lucy. I don't like it. Because the biggest crime is it has potential that it doesn't even try to explore.
It definitely, I got that sense watching it this time. I still don't hate the film, but me kind of laughing at it was one of the main things I took out of it. Yeah.
And that is Lucy. Thank you so much for bringing this across our desk. It has haunted us for a little while. We've mentioned it a few times on the pod and off the pod. Lucy has come up. So I was actually a bit surprised when it actually was brought onto the pod. I'm like, I guess we're finally doing
last week when you were like, why are you recommending that? I'm like, why wouldn't I recommend it?
I guess so. I was expecting you to be like Valerian when you said when it was like Luc Besson.
I don't know much about Valerian.
Exactly. I thought you're like, I don't know much, but it looks really wacky. And Will and I have talked about it. So you're like, maybe, but no, Lucy.
I do want to see Leon the Professional again. My dad showed me that. I really liked it, I remember.
If we did that, there would be a lot of discussion about Luc Besson's inclinations as a man, but that's a conversation for another time. So it's my turn for a recommendation, and I was looking over the list just before we recorded, and I was like, okay, there's some films that I feel are a good follow-up to this, and so I'm going to go with one that was created and directed by the man who did the special effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey. This film is called Silent Running. That is the name of the film. It's a 1970s science fiction film starring Bruce Dern, father of Laura Dern. Bruce Dern is an actor who's been around the block. You may have seen him in something over the years or may not have. I'm not too sure.
Like we have we seen him in something already on the show?
I'm not too sure if we've seen him on the show. I cannot recall, but we'll find out.
Definitely heard you talk about him before.
Bruce Dern, yeah. I'm trying to think what you'd know him from, but then I was like, oh, you haven't seen that one. He was in Hateful Eight.
Right.
So he was great. He plays angry people, but Silent Running will be the one to go off of because it's a sci-fi film. It's again, it has that 2001: A Space Odyssey connection. I will say this, and this is my little spiel, and then we'll watch it. The creator, the guy, Doug Trumbull, I think was the man's name, who directs this. He was so depressed working on 2001: A Space Odyssey because he felt it was so inhuman, like so cold, that he wanted to make a science fiction film that was deeply human.
Okay.
And that's Silent Running. We are on YouTube and Spotify and Apple and Google Podcasts while it remains, and all of the other podcasting sites. If you have not rated and reviewed the podcast, you really ought to. Isn't that right, Bartek?
That's a good idea.
Have you?
No.
Wow.
Is it ethical to rate and review my own podcast?
Have you listened to it?
Yeah.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I love it. It's great.
You should then.
Yeah, it's not biased if I like it.
Well, you listened to it at least.
Yeah. I haven't listened to any Pictures Powwow episode though, so does that? Well, that's our main thing.
Put that in your review.
So I haven't actually listened to Pictures Powwow, but Spit and Polish Brothers is great.
My favorite episode is actually the Mystery Box one about
I've listened to all of the Mystery Box.
Yeah, of course. About Betaville and the wacky tank that they have.
You know, I think there was a line in Lucy where I think it was Morgan Freeman's exposition where he's like, think about all the things humanity has created, and it showed like, you know, people like flying and things like that, and the pilot in the fighter ship reminded me of the pilot in the fighter ship in the stock footage of Betaville. So I was like, oh yeah, humanity created Betaville. So it's very apt that you bring it up now. It
is true.
It is true.
It did create the film Betaville, starring Judge Reinhold.
And John Aston.
and John Aston.
Can we watch Betaville again? I was very sleepy the first time we watched it.
Thank you all so much. Until next time, remember to be kind to each other, or else.
I was, after I finished watching the movie, Lucy, I messaged Oliver like, Lucy was sillier than I remembered.
And did Oliver appreciate that comment?
I think he did, but then he like launched into a tirade about, the something message become a fucking USB. And then I wrote down the quote that the film ends on, like the, life a billion years ago, now you know what to do with it. And he responded with a Doctor Who quote, and I got scared and stopped talking.
What was the Doctor Who quote?
Please
tell me. I know Doctor Who. It could be an important quote. And Oliver is a coward. Should have come on this podcast and complained in person. Just going to leave it in messages. Disappointing. Now you're bringing up Doctor Who quotes? I'm the Doctor Who fan here. Don't you dare. I was actually talking about Doctor Who before we recorded. I was on the phone to my sibling talking about Doctor Who. Bartek walked in and he was like, whoa, Doctor Who. I'm going to mention that on the podcast. And here we are.
Yeah, I didn't forget. Isn't that cool of me?
Very sexy of you. What was the quote?
Life is easy, simple, nature's way of keeping meat fresh.
Thank you. Sure, why not?